Excellent. Right, let's move on to League One then. Hull City are sitting pretty at the top of the table, and they've won some really important games recently as well, beating Peterborough, and then also, of course, winning again against Oxford on Saturday. They are looking ripe for a return to the Championship, and the man at the helm is the same man who was there last season when they were getting thumped 8-0 by Wigan. Grant McCann has done a remarkable job to turn it around, but Mike, given his background and how he was brought up and everything that we know about Grant McCann, first of all, you have to take your hat off to him. Second of all, it's not entirely surprising that he's stuck around, is it?
No, he's certainly a tough cookie, yeah. Brought up on the streets of Belfast, and he's really not fazed by anything. I mean, some of he was kind of thrust into the Championship, possibly ahead of his career path, ahead of his time. It was, for some managers, it might have been too much too soon. He came in at the same time as Jonathan Woodgate, for example, at Middlesbrough. Very similar circumstances, very similar roles. And, it proved to be too much for Woodgate. McCann was relegated instead of Middlesbrough, as it happened. But, McCann's been able to stick it out. And in spite of, it's been difficult because there's been a lot of pressure from the local media and stuff like that, because he's seen as kind of, the alums have brought him in to do a particular job. They're always all these cost-cutting measures. McCann doesn't complain, and he just keeps fronting up time and time again. And no matter how bad things get, his demeanour doesn't change. He's really, always bullish, always believes in himself, and just keeps coming back for more. And, whereas last season, after losing Kamil Grosicki and Jared Bowen in January, he kind of almost drove, it's harsh to say drove them to relegation, but he was so demanding of players who probably weren't up to scratch, mostly League One players who were trying to cut the teeth in the Championship. And he was so demanding of them in the middle of such a bad run of form that, he kind of crushed the confidence a little bit. But that same demanding nature this season is now why those same players are at the top of League One and looking like they're going to get a return to the Championship and probably be better, more prepared for it next time around.
Yeah, because he had a hard time from the local media, as you say. I mean, quite rightly, given some of those performances. But he always, in fairness to him, he always answered the questions. And like you say, he never really changed his stance. But he just had this absolutely steely determination. You can imagine that 9 out of 10 managers would have crumbled under some of those questions, particularly from BBC Humberside, but not McCann. And that is strong leadership, and that obviously comes across well to the players as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that, strong leadership is the only way you can put it. If you're in that dressing room, you never once doubting the manager. With such conviction to everything that he does. So when he's demanding of you on the training ground, or he's setting you up for a game on a weekend and laying out his tactics, I don't think anyone would be inclined to question him, because he's got that such strength of conviction in everything that he does. And yeah, you refer to the interviews on BBC Humberside. I mean, they've been fantastic listening for the past 18 months. Burnsy, the local reporter there's, quite notorious for his... he can be quite in your face and always asking the last question that he can be quite pessimistic at times and always see the negative in everything, but pulls no punches with some of his questions sometimes. But McCann is the sort of manager that doesn't back down. It's made compelling listening at times, because I think that alone, just trying to contend with a local reporter who's, so can really put you on the spot with such difficult questions sometimes, and really put a negative spin on things when you least need it. I think that alone could trip a lot of managers up, regardless of what's actually happening on the pitch and what the league table looks like. I think if you've got a weak spot and can't stand up to it, I think that it can really expose some inexperience, some weaknesses, whatever. But because McCann just stands up to it, fronts up all the time, and we'll give it back sometimes in that, we'll open up a debate and turn the spotlight back on Burnsy. It's like, it's been riveting listening at times at various points. That the 8-0 defeat at Wigan, for example, being a prime case in point.
One thing I noticed as well during those interviews, particularly at the end of last season, he never called his players out individually. Collectively, yes. I mean, he had to criticise his players, particularly after that 8-0 defeat. But he was never really particularly keen, despite the pressure from the interviewer, as we mentioned, to call out individual players. Is that, do you think, because some of those players are young and inexperienced, and he doesn't want to have an impact on them going forward? Or do you think that's just his kind of protective approach to the way he manages?
It's empathy. I think he just understands what is going to potentially damage a player and his confidence further down the line. I think he always knows the right thing to say in any given situation. He's very conscious of when he comes to an interview, when he fronts up, he always knows what he should be saying and what's potentially going to do damage if you say the wrong thing, even in terms of potentially motivating opposition and things like that. He always knows the right things to say. He's very mindful of, just the ramifications of words, of where, responsibility lies and things like that. He's very much wants to take the responsibility on his own shoulders. Again, a strong figurehead in that sense. I think he's the sort of manager that when he comes out to face the microphones or the cameras, has already knows in his own mind what he's going to say before he even turns up. He's not necessarily rehearsed or anything like that. He just knows in his own mind. I think he just maps out, okay, this is what's happened. I'm framing the situation now in my own mind. This is what I need to say because this is going to get the best outcome further down the line. And then he just comes and he can be very quick with his answers. He can be very good on his toes and in the moment in terms of sticking to the narrative that he wants to create. And he's very good at creating the right narrative that needs to be that needs to be shared.
Just out of interest, was that something that he showcased much, if you can remember, when he was at Peterborough? Or is that something he's kind of had to develop and work on because of the relentless nature of the media in Hull?
I think the Peterborough job didn't suit him because mainly because I think Darren McCann is such an all-encompassing figure over the club and wants a handle on so many different things within the club. And I think McCann's the sort of manager that wants control of everything on the football side. And I think that was always going to be a struggle in terms of recruitment and in terms of, at Hull, I think he suits the Allams and the Allams suit him. And I think that it's only the fans that are kind of being left out of that equation that aren't getting their say. But in terms of if you're the Allams, Grant McCann never complains about the hand that he's dealt. He just gets on with it. The one thing he wants is control. And he'll happily have control over a bum hand than a lot less control over a potentially really good hand like he would have had at Peterborough. I think as long as he's got control and gets to play the cards he wants to play when he wants to play them, then he's happy. So under the Allams, okay, pull players out of, just sell players from underneath me, pull the rug from underneath me from time to time, move the goalposts, so long as, okay, let me negotiate with you then what you're going to give me back. As long as I've got control over how I respond to the position you've put me in, as long as I've got full control and autonomy over the team I pick every week and everything that goes on, the way the club is run behind the scenes as a football, enterprise, then he's happy. So at Hull, I think he's a better fit for Hull City as a club. At Peterborough, he probably had a lot more potential of a club that he could move forward with. But because of Darren McCann and the fact that Darren McCann wants a handle on certain things and it's his football club, he's got every right to want to have such a say in recruitment and have full control over those things. I think that was always going to be a tension point that we're never really going to get past.
And this need for full control, I mean, I imagine it is innate, it's part of his personality, but will that have been exacerbated by the way he played the game? We've talked before about how central midfielders tend to make really good managers because they see everything from that vantage point. But he was 100% committed in that, in the central midfielder position. He essentially, often controlled the midfield as well and controlled games. Do you think that has been exacerbated by his playing career?
Possibly. It's not something I've particularly thought about before, other than the fact, like you say, he's a central midfielder, and it's not uncommon for central midfielders to, to be so prevalent within football management. No, it's not really something I've given much thought, but it is certainly an innate part of his personality to have control of outer world things as well. It's like he knows his own mind, he knows what he wants, and his job and his flow state is to get other people to comply with what he wants. So, I mean, even go back to last season, in terms of, those players weren't good enough for championship level at that point last season. There were too many League One players, all in the same team, all at once. And the two big, star players left in January. And he kept telling them that they were good enough and they had to believe in themselves, and that he just kept demanding of them, even though it was an awful run. It was something like 15 defeats out of the last 18 matches or something like that. And he kept demanding, and he kept on to the next game. We go again, and it was like he never made a compromise. He was always trying to control that. He had a preconceived idea of what he wanted to see on the pitch, and it was always about being on the front foot and going after teams, even though other teams are usually stronger. And he wouldn't, he never really got pragmatic and went defensive or tried to stop the rot. It was like, no, this is what I want and this is what I demand. And he kept pushing for it and, trying to control his players in that way, rather than, he'll adapt in terms of the things he comes and says out to the media, in terms of trying to protect their confidence and their mindset. But in terms of what he asks of them and what he demands, I just think he's got this prefixed idea and he just tries to really impose it until they get it. Obviously, this season, now they're getting it, he's getting what he wants from his players.
Hull, of course, leading the way, looking good for a promotion this season. How do you envisage him dealing with pressure? We've not really seen a huge amount of it so far this season, but now, fans and everyone looking in will be expecting them to go up. How does he ensure that his side don't crumble under pressure?
I think the question is whether the players can deal with the pressure, because there's no doubt that McCann can. He dealt with the pressure of last season's relegation. I mean, given the nature that Hull plummeted down the table, he dealt with the pressure of that really, really well. I mean, that doesn't mean that he didn't really do them much good, but he personally, as a fronting open as an upstanding, strong leader, he kept to that side of the bargain, no problem at all. So I've got no qualms about Grant McCann losing his head at any stage in this running. I will back him to always say the right things and frame every match in the right way. To keep the players' mindset. I think the big thing for Hull as well, and I think this is physically, they've only got one Tuesday game left now. They've played more games than everyone else, and people think, okay, games in hand, other teams can catch up. I think it's more. There's just as much potential that you'll hit fatigue when it really matters at the end of the season by trying to cram in too many games. Hull don't have that problem. It's nice and clear for them. One more Tuesday game left. Physically, I think they're going to be able to deliver whatever they need to deliver week to week. Mentally, maybe it's too much time between games to think over the dynamics and the permutations of what might happen and what the table might look like, and think too much about what's at stake. But I also think McCann can frame things every step of the way really well. I think they're in a really strong position. And I think it also as well, similar to Mark Warburton, logistics, resources, all of those things. I don't think it's a coincidence that Hull have got to this stage, having had no real COVID crisis, having had not too many postponements, having had not too many injuries. And now they've just got 10 games to go, one Tuesday fixture, lots of Saturday turnarounds, lots of time to prepare on the training ground. Where McCann does his best work, by the way, he's not a classroom. He's a guy on the training ground, I believe, likes the time to drill his players between matches and prepare for the opposition. I think everything's in the favour. I'd be very surprised, but you can never say what might creep into the minds of players and what might undermine them. But I don't see McCann causing any of the problems that might arise for Hull now. I think they're in a very strong place.
And if they do go up and find themselves in the Championship next season, how do you see McCann faring? Because obviously had a squad built for League One. There are some good quality players in that squad, and no doubt they'll add to them as well if they do find themselves back in the second tier. But how do you see it going this time around, apart from evidently him being a lot more prepared?
I'm going to take a leap and I'm going to say I think they'll be fine, because I think it's easy to forget that before Jared Bowen and Grosicki got sold, the rug got pulled from under him halfway through the season, last season, they were going absolutely fine. You know, all right, they were two quality players, but they were 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th in the table. They were going for the playoffs going into January. So, you know, those are the kind of standards he can possibly aspire to. Obviously, he hasn't got a Grosicki or Bowen now, but the players he did bring in of League One calibre have now got that bit of championship experience. It'll frighten the living daylights out of them what could happen next season if they're not right at it. So I don't think there's any danger that those players who suffered those horrors at the end of last season won't be prepared this time. They'll be absolutely determined to not let those kind of experiences happen to them again. So I think those players will be in a better place to make that step up now. I think McCann, as being such a driving force, will demand to be top half. You know, I'm not saying that they necessarily will be a top half championship team. I think that's what the demands will be from Grant McCann, though. And I think sometimes if you're just so single-minded and, you know, geared towards the top of the table, I think you generally generate enough points to, you know, you're not keeping one eye over your shoulder. You look at your Rotherhams and Wickhams and teams like that come up that don't necessarily feel like belong at championship level. I don't think there'll be any danger of that with McCann in charge at Hull. I think that whole dressing room will believe it already belongs at championship level. And, you know, we'll drive forward for at least something like a mid-table finish.
And if you fancy using what we've discussed with regards to Grant McCann to improve your betting, then Mike, there is a free case study that is available right now.
Yeah, I've been using manager profiling since lockdown. It's basically, I found it really become a real struggle from the perspective of team strength and using, you know, mathematical rating system to pick winners, and because, you know, data science out there now makes it so difficult. And then I just started attacking it from a new perspective, using manager profiling, picking battles with teams at certain times, and, you know, depending on the opposition and what kind of scenario suits certain managers and things like that. I found it really profitable. It's been really good. So I put together a case study video that kind of explains some of the core principles behind it and how it works. So that's just available if you click on the link in the description and get access to that video.